Okay, let's look at this next instance of the Spirit in Romans 8. Um, and it is the first fruits of the Spirit uh, in verse 23. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we groan within ourselves, awaiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. Now, the last thing we saw was the spirit of sonship, and you kind of have to read a little forward to put this in context, or read backward. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. The Spirit, we've received the spirit of sonship, right, or adoption, which we cry, Abba, Father. And then he says, if children were heirs, and heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may be glorified together. And that sounds conditional, like, well, I have to suffer with Christ if I'm going to be glorified with him, and if I don't suffer with him, then I won't be glorified with him. I've seen people put that in a works thing. It's not what it's talking about. And we need to read these verses to build up to the first fruit. So, for the earnest expectation of the creature, or the creation, waits for, the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creation, was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who subjected the same in hope. Because the creature itself shall also be delivered from bondage of corruption unto the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. Not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even so, we groan within ourselves, awaiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. So here we are waiting for the adoption, and we've received the spirit of adoption, or sonship, same word. We're waiting for the sonship. What is that? That is the glorious manifestation of the sons of God. And the whole creation groans. It's been subject to futility for this purpose. It's waiting for the glorious liberty of the sons of God to be manifested, because the creation will also eventually be delivered into that liberty. So everybody's groaning, and we are groaning because we have the first fruits of the Spirit. And what is that? The first fruits in the Old Testament was when they entered the land, when they planted their harvest, they would offer the first fruits of the harvest as a sample and wave it before God. It's called a wave offering. As a representative sample, signifying, number one, that God is the one who gave the harvest. And also, it was a taste or a sample of the harvest to come, meaning it was representative of that harvest. And the same is true in us. We've received the Spirit as a representation of what's to come. The harvest being the blossoming of the seed. Remember in Romans 1:4, the seed of David was declared to be the Son of God with power by the Spirit of holiness, according to the resurrection of the dead, right? So the Spirit that designated Christ in resurrection as the Son of God, which was the blossoming of that seed that had been planted in the earth and died and been broken open, and now in resurrection he's springing up as a harvest. Well, that Spirit is in us as a first fruit, representing that harvest which is to come. What is the harvest to come? It is the glorious manifestation of the sons of God. That will be the ultimate harvest of the seed that got planted. And we have that, we are the soil for that sample to grow in. And we've received the Spirit as a sample and as a guarantee that the harvest is coming. So this can be connected to Ephesians 1:14 that says, 13 says, after you heard the word of the truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also you believed, you were sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, which is an earnest or a pledge or a foretaste of our inheritance until the redemption of the purchased possession. Same concept. It's a foretaste. It's a sample of what's to come, and it's a guarantee of what's to come. It's a pledge. The first fruit pledges what's to come, this enjoyment of the Spirit that we have. But, so he's in us bearing witness, right, that we are children of God. And that witness is a guaranteeing, it's a foretaste, it's a sample representing a harvest that's yet to come. And it's a guarantee that it's to come. It's the guarantee of the redemption of our body. It's the guarantee that we will be glorified. We have this first fruits of the Spirit. But it also causes us to suffer. What kind of suffering is it? It is a suffering of anticipation. When I was in the world, I didn't really suffer this way. Everybody suffers, you know. I suffered in my life. But this is a different kind of suffering because my hope has been set on this harvest, this glorification. And yet I hope in what I don't see. And so I wait for it earnestly. And that earnest anticipation is a kind of suffering. It's actually a kind of travail that makes my whole life feel like futility in contrast to this purpose for which I've been sealed with the Spirit. The more I get to know the Lord and get to know His taste in me, I have a kind of suffering. And imagine a kid, he knows it's Christmas in the morning, and you tell him, no, you got to sleep tonight, right? Or you don't get your present. He's too excited. Sleeping seems like futility. You couldn't imagine doing anything more vain than sleeping on Christmas Eve if you're a kid and you know there's presents downstairs. So sometimes you let them open one present, right? So that he'll go to bed. Well, that's like the first fruit, you know? And then his whole night becomes a night of suffering until he finally falls asleep. But that's the picture, is that he wouldn't be suffering if it weren't Christmas Eve and Christmas wasn't in the morning. If it was just a day like any other day, he would just be doing what he does. But because of that anticipation of the Christmas morning with its presence, he is full of hope, and that hope makes his present situation seem like futility. And that's kind of our life. We all know this, especially those of us who are watching for the Lord's coming, which the reason we long for that is because it brings with it the glorification of the sons of God, the manifestation of the sons of God, the redemption of our body, the completion of our salvation. And we've had a taste, and we have the Spirit in us bearing witness that we are the sons of God, and yet we're still in this fallen creation, and we're now groaning with the creation in a kind of travail, which is a birth travail. It's a travail to bring forth the completion of what God began, right? And so that's the suffering that it's talking about when it says that, the Spirit bears witness that we are sons of God and children and heirs, heirs together with Christ, if so be that we suffer with Him, so that we can also be glorified with Him. It's saying, look, your suffering is no longer futile. You used to suffer apart from Christ, but now you suffer with Christ, and it's a different kind of suffering. It's a suffering of the present time that's not worthy to be compared with the glory that's going to be revealed in us. And you are earnestly expecting the manifestation of the sons of God, and your whole life has become a kind of futility in the light of that. It's been subject to futility and vanity in hope. That hope, our hope is now on something future. You can't make me hope in something like, sometimes my wife gets excited that we're going to go. Are you excited we're going to go on vacation? This year I've not been excited we're going on vacation. I want the Lord to come. I can't get excited about hardly anything in this life. I can be mildly interested, but it's not the same. It's all been subject to futility. And we're waiting for that day when we are delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. And we have the first fruits of the Spirit. And this causes us to groan and travail, right? It's a good kind of groaning because it's a groan of expectation. Christmas is in the morning. We just have to sleep through the night, and it's so hard, but we got to do it. And that is a kind of suffering. Can you imagine the Lord on this earth? He had to clothe himself with humanity, knowing who he is, and live 33 years on this earth in a kind of a mundane sort of life compared to what he's used to. And he said, uh, I'm longing to be baptized and into the fire, and I've got a fire burning in me that I'm longing to cast on the earth. He was so pressing to be released from the shell and be glorified. Uh, well, we kind of have that feeling too in a limited measure because we have the first fruits of the Spirit. And the first fruits, again, is a pledge guaranteeing that God will accomplish that which it's the first fruits of the harvest. The harvest is already there, and he's given us a sample of it so we can taste what it is that's to come. And sometimes we get a little taste, even in our suffering, we get a taste of the sweetness of the Spirit. We get an enjoyment, and that's a sample. That's the first fruits. And then it says, likewise, the Spirit also helps our weaknesses, right? But if we hope for what we see, then we do not, then we with patience wait for it. Likewise, the Spirit helps with our infirmities. We know not what we should pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And this is the other thing. He is in us interceding. And, we are groaning. We sense this longing and we suffer. And it brings us into a place of weakness. We are not so strong in this world to carry out the responsibilities anymore because it's hard for us to even put our attention on these things. That's where the analogy of the Christmas Eve fails because I can't help my son go to sleep. He's weak to sleep because he's so strong to want to open the presents, right? I can't really help him. I could give him drugs, I guess, but I'm not going to do that. But we have a different position. We have a hard time sometimes attending to this life because it's just vanity. It's futility. Who cares? But we still have to do it, right? Because we can't just let our life become a mess. Where's the witness in that? And that hurts people around us. So we still have to attend to this life. Well, that's where the Spirit, it helps us by interceding for us and making things flow more smoothly than they could otherwise. When we rest in him, we let him. We don't know how to pray. I don't even care about praying about this life that much, but he's within me interceding to make sure that everything in my life is working according to the counsel of his will, and my steps are ordered, and the events for each day are there by his design. That's really what that's talking about in my view, is how the sovereignty of God and his wisdom is manifested in my life through the interceding high priest with his Spirit in me. When I don't know how to pray, I get into these situations of weakness where it's like, I don't even care. I just want to go home, Lord. Well, at that same time, he's in us interceding, kind of focusing on what we sometimes just can't even bring ourselves to focus on. That's how I look at that. And he's interceding for us to grow in life and to bring forward his purpose, to bring in the fullness of the Gentiles and get us out of here. He's interceding according to the will of God. Okay? And he that searches the hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, and those are called according to his purpose. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestinated, them he also called. Those he called, He also justified those he justified. He also glorified. In other words, it's a done deal. You have the first fruits, guaranteeing the redemption of the purchased possession, the redemption of your body, the glorification that you've been caused to long for, and your whole life has been brought into futility because you've been subject to this hope that's now in you, which is this supplied by the Spirit, who is shedding abroad the love of God in your heart by the Holy Spirit. This hope does not disappoint, but it sure does make our life feel like futility sometimes. Well, He's also interceding for us because we could barely bring ourselves to focus on it, and yet He's got it all under control. And not only that, but He's working all things according to the counsel of His own will, because our high priest is taking care of everything. He's enthroned. Our high priest, the one who intercedes for us according to the will of God, is also on the throne. And that means He's got the authority to head everything up and subject it all to His will. And that will is that we would be conformed to the image of the Son and glorified. And everything in our life is working towards that purpose. Okay, so that's all on this one. But yes, the first fruits of the Spirit. On the one hand, it's an enjoyable foretaste of what's to come, guaranteeing that the inheritance is already ours, that the harvest is already there, and we've got the sample in our hands to prove it. And then on the other hand, causes us to travail and groan, and we suffer with Christ because we now long for the same thing He longs for. And while we're groaning, we don't know how to give utterance or expression to what it is that's trying to happen. But our Christ is a high priest, and the Spirit is in us, making intercession according to the will of God to make sure that it all comes to pass.